Good evening. I am Lissa Southerland, Chief Operating Officer at Union Settlement. Union Settlement is a social service agency in the heart of East Harlem whose mission is to create opportunity for East Harlem residents and community members by offering comprehensive programs that help underserved residents improve their skills and build better lives for themselves and their family. Tonight, Union Settlement is excited to host our fireside chat, Women and Race in the Workplace and Beyond, our first ever panel discussion to discuss women and race, where we've created a forum to begin to unpack the discussions of the challenges women of color currently face in their workplace. We have a powerhouse group of panelists tonight that I will be introducing shortly, but before I do, I want to set the context on why Union Settlement decided to do a panel on this topic tonight. As a social service agency in the heart of East Harlem, it is our job to advocate for the many injustices that face the communities of color every day, racial injustice being an important one. And for our women of color, an even more important one, and a constant reminder that there is still more work to be done. Several months ago, the world watched as the murders of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and more recently, Walter Wallace Jr., and more poignantly, the senseless murder of Breonna Taylor began to unfold. And as the world watched these horrible killings unfold, so did Union Settlement. And we began to think thoughtfully of how we could help our community have a voice on the many topics surrounding race and racial injustice. The juxtaposition of women and race is an important one. And in this year marked by crisis and uncertainty, many job areas, but especially corporate America, is at a crossroads as the choices companies and organizations make today will have lasting consequences for the women of color for decades to come. This topic and many more we're going to unpack tonight, and I'm so excited. So let's begin our fireside chat by introducing our amazing panelists. First, we have Rose Pierre-Louis. Rose Pierre is our Chief Operating Officer from NYU McSilver Institute. Hello, Rose.
Hi. Good evening.
Next, we have Rebecca Mattis-Pinard. Rebecca is the Chief Equity and Diversity and Inclusion Officer at Marymount Manhattan College. Hello, Rebecca.
Hi, good to be here.
Next, we have Yesenia Mata. Yesenia is the executive director of La Comena. La Comena is a community-based organization in Staten Island that helps and works with our immigrant populations. Hello, Yesenia. And finally, last but not least, we have Andrea De Loney. Andrea is the diversity and inclusion strategist at Northwell Health. Hi, Andrea.
Hi, Lisa. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. All right, ladies, so we're ready to get into it. I'm ready to unpack. I'm very excited. Thank you all for coming. And so let's get started. So I'm going to direct the first question to Rose this evening. I'm going to start with you. So can you tell us what comes to mind when you got the invitation to be a panelist tonight about the discussion of race challenges, and women in the workplace?
Thank you so much for the question, and I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you to Union Settlement, and I'm really looking forward to this discussion with this esteemed panel of power women. For me, when I received the call from Ingrid Sotelo, I thought, what a great time in this moment to have the conversation as you so beautifully laid out, that in this moment, that we needed to create a space to talk about us. I think as women of color, women in general, we take care of everybody else, but oftentimes we are last. And I felt that this was a conversation that really needed to happen, and that we needed to create the space to do that, no matter how many Zoom calls we have, no matter what is going on in our lives. So for me, I jumped at the chance to have this opportunity. And for me, it is an opportunity to share feelings and to learn from others who are really leading across industries.
Thanks, Rose. And what about you, Rebecca? What you think about when you got the invitation today to be a part of this esteemed event?
Yeah, once again, thank you for inviting me. I'm happy to be a part of this conversation. And similar to Rose, I got the invitation from Ingrid Sotelo, who is a former student of mine. And just that in and of itself was exciting to be invited into this and to think about young people that we've worked with, young people of color that are going into their professional field and thinking about that cycle. So just that in and of itself was really exciting to be a part of that and to be a part of her professional journey and to connect in that kind of way. And just the power of networking and role modeling and just, having that come full circle. But for someone like me that does work in diversity and inclusion, where a lot of it is thinking about strategizing around institutions and how to care for our stakeholders in our institutions, sometimes we get left out of the conversation as diversity workers and thinking about the need for space and connection amongst other Black women. So for me, this feels therapeutic in a sense, and to be able to be in conversation with other Black women and talk about challenges that arise in the workplace. So I'm excited to be in conversation and to share ideas and approaches to this work.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Yesenia, what about you? What came to mind when you got the invitation today to be a part of the panel?
Well, first of all, thank you for
I think she locked up. Okay, so Andrea, why don't you take it? Oh, she's back. Okay.
and the reason why it was very therapeutic is because as a young woman of color, as a young Latina, growing up, it was very difficult when I kept opening new doors that were constantly being closed. And a lot of the times I never had a mentor that was a female. And when it came about to finding female mentors, it really helped me because it guided me on how to open doors that were constantly being closed. And well, today being on this panel with these amazing other women who I know went through so much to get where they're at this moment, and yet are sharing their experiences and how they're feeling is very important for other young women of color, immigrant women as well, that at times don't know where to go or also may not have a mentor. But I think having these conversations is very important because I wish when I was younger I would have had somebody that I could relate to and say, yes, this is exactly how I'm feeling. So I'm very happy to have the conversations that we're going to be having tonight.
Thank you so much. And Andrea, what about you? What spoke to you when you got this invitation today to be a part of the panel?
Thank you for the question, Lisa. And again, to Union Settlement and all of the partners, thank you for extending the invitation. I think for me personally, when you work in a space where you have diversity, inclusion, and equity connected to your job title, there's so much pressure, not only from your institution, but also from your colleagues who are relying on you to be a voice at the table, oftentimes at tables that they don't necessarily have, the ability to sit at and speak at. And so to be able to get invited into a space where psychological safety will be promoted and that you will be able to connect with other leaders in this space who can empathize, really empathize, from a spiritual level, a mental level, a physical level, it's refreshing. So I was excited. I think right now we're all functioning in a very, high pressure time and with so much going on within our organizations as well as in the world. It's nice to be able to take a step back and really just release and debrief with colleagues and also increase your network, right? And know that you have other sisters out here that you can rely on and you can turn to.
Absolutely. So let's get into it. So I guess my next question is, have you ever had to mask or downplay any aspect of your physical, cultural, spiritual, or emotional self at work? And I'm going to direct that one first to Rebecca.
Yeah, I think there was always a sentiment that I was expected to, and I second guessed the way that I show up in the workplace, but I've always chosen not to. For me, I always thought it was important to show up as myself and express myself as it relates to my cultural identity. my sexual orientation. For me, being a Black queer woman, and especially a Black queer woman in higher education, is extremely important. When I was in college, I never saw myself modeled. And so I knew that once I entered these spaces, I was going to show up as myself and always show up authentically. And that took me a lot of years of therapy to be able to do that and to be comfortable in doing so. So I paid too much money for therapy to not show up as myself. And because there are so many messages that we get in our world that tell us to tone down who we are and to not value who we are, and to make ourselves worthy and acceptable in a certain kind of way. And I really have worked through doing that, right? So I'm the person that will show up with loud colors and will wear my hair big and bright, and you will see me, and I want you to see me. And, I know the impact that that's had on students who have seen me on campus, and, when they're about to graduate, will come up to me and say, I've always wanted to come up to you, but I've always seen you with your bright red pants, and I just wanted to say hi. And something as important as that, as being seen, is really important. So I try to not downplay myself, even though I know that the world wants me to. And when that happens, I show up even louder. I will say the emotional part, yes, that part I have downplayed. And there are definitely times that I've written emails and I was like, nope, let's rewrite this and take some of these out. And how do we say this in a certain kind of way, right? And that's where it's important for me to have colleagues that I trust and colleagues that can relate to me as it relates to our racial identities and connect in that way, where we can have a space to be together and not be concerned about how certain things show up, right? So community is really important to find that balance of how you show up professionally, but also show up authentically to yourself and your needs.
Absolutely. Yesenia, what about you?
Well, I echo the same that Rebecca just expressed. Growing up, I always had to second guess myself every time that I went into a room. I always would get certain comments such as, "Oh, you have a very strong accent," or other things such as, "Oh, we never seen a Latina here," right? So for me, every time when I walked in a room, I always had to second guess myself. But thankfully, I had amazing parents that always taught me to be very proud of who I am, which is a young woman of color, a Latina, and especially where I grew up. Right, I was born and raised in the south side of Chicago, and it was very difficult navigate professional settings because of all of the things that I would hear along the way, such as, "Oh, well, you grew up in the south side of Chicago. Oh, it's very bad there. Or it's, there's nothing but bad people there." And for me, I would take that to heart because that's where my family was and still is. And I think over the years, the more I started getting comfortable with who I was and understanding I understanding the responsibility that you have as well. That when you go into a room, that you're also opening that door to other young women of color, right? So the more I started getting comfortable in I would say my own skin, the louder I got, right? The louder I got, and then I just make it a mission every time I walk into a room to let people know, like, yes, that here I am. And every time when I walk into a room, sometimes people go like, "Oh my God, here comes Yesenia. She's gonna start talking about immigration." And then I always stop and I say, "Yes, I will talk about immigration, because if I don't speak up on immigration, who else will?" Right? So who else would? I remember one of the things was that how both of my parents had a very difficult time navigating the system because they were immigrants, and at the time there was nobody out there to speak for them. And you see that, I guess now when I walk in a room, you will see that I'm there and you would hear me. So I think it did take years of getting comfortable of who I am with who I am, but most importantly to learn about the responsibility that I have every time I walk into a room to ensure that I keep that door open and set that example for the next woman of color that's going to be walking into that door.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. What about you, Rose?
So I loved what everybody just said. For me, I'm probably the oldest person on the panel. I was born in the 60s, first generation Haitian American. And I would say I was very thankful to my parents that instilled in me an immense sense of cultural and ethnic pride and an awareness that I was a Black woman moving through the world. And so I've always led with that. But what I would say is that working in government and also in law, there's sort of norms about how you're supposed to, particularly as women in the profession, how you're supposed to present yourself. And as I grow older, I've tried to break out of those norms. I would say the one thing that I have consciously worked on is to not make myself smaller, to make my superiors seem bigger. And I think a lot of times as women of color, we're taught to sort of fit in and conform. And now I try to be as unabashed about being a woman and certainly being a Black woman.
Absolutely. And Andrea, did you have anything you want to add to that one?
Yeah, I definitely echo all of the sentiments that have been shared by all of my new sisters. I think one of the things for me that's been a challenge and an area that I constantly look to grow in is that emotional balance, right? I think growing up, you're definitely taught to separate or find that balance between what level of emotion you share in the workplace versus having your game face on, doing your job, and then returning home. However, when my career transitioned into diversity and inclusion, I realized that some of my greatest accomplishments have been through some of my most vulnerable moments. And so really learning, how do I balance those vulnerable conversations? How do I manage, how deep I allow for my colleagues or our patients or any of my partners to really see me go? And thankfully, working in the healthcare space, I work for an organization where we really do promote showing up as your whole self and really being authentic and really being vulnerable. And, I'm grateful to be able to work with teams and on a team that just amazing people who really do support that and encourage our growth, one another's growth. So it's definitely an interesting balance, but something that I really do enjoy learning about myself more and more.
Awesome. So Andrea, I'm going to throw this one back to you because I think it piggybacks on exactly what you were saying in the previous question. So we've all heard the stigma that exists when we hear the phrase angry Black or Latina woman. And so oftentimes in the workplace, especially when we're dealing with women of color, especially those in leadership roles, our passion comes across as angry Black woman, or we're aggressive or too bossy. And so can you give us your thoughts on why you feel like that stigma is there and what are your feelings about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. And this is something within our employee resource groups that we definitely talk about quite often. And something that myself and many of my peers at work always talk about is that, we're not responsible for others' level of comfort when we show up in a room. It's not our job to make you comfortable. It's not our job to, balance off your level of self-esteem or confidence in the work that you're doing when we're showing up with reason and purpose. So to that end, I always say, show up being your whole self, be confident, be bold, be proud. We're there for a reason. We're here for a purpose. In this climate that we're in, we have a voice that matters. We have a voice that needs to be heard. And I think it's up to others to do the same self-work that we have to do when we're showing up to spaces. They're just as responsible for doing the self-work that they need to do so that they can meet us where they need to meet us in order for us to achieve the goals that we're all working towards.
Absolutely. Great answer. Yesenia, what about you? What do you think about the stigma that sometimes exists, especially as it relates to hearing, maybe yourself or colleagues or friends being called an angry Latina woman in the workplace?
Yes, well, a lot of the times, and I find that very disrespectful because there's times where I've had to speak louder because certain people acted as if they didn't hear me, and I would get a comment, "Oh, you're so sassy. Oh, you have so much blame." And for me, I took it very offensive because, I went to grad school. I have my MBA. I've gone through various trainings to get where I'm at, and yet I still get undermined for being a Latina and saying, "Oh, you're too sassy" or whatnot. But yet again, when another male speaks in the same tone, or if he's a white male particularly, they're not giving any sort of name. So for me, at first, when I first started getting that, I would have to stand back and kind of think about it, because I would say, was I too much? Or should I just not speak that loud? Or should I just tone it down a bit? But then over the years, I just realized that no, that in all honesty, that I wasn't wrong in doing that. That if I didn't speak up that way, I would have never gotten the results that I did, which the results were for my community. And so I think for me, over the years, I learned to understand that the way that I advocate for my community, it's never that, oh, I have so much blame or too sassy. It's that, no, this is the way that I need to speak up for my community, because again, if I don't, then no one else will in the room.
Thank you so much. What about you, Rebecca?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of the sentiments that have been shared. And also at the same time, there is some truth to it. I am angry sometimes, right? And that's not my sole character. That is not the only emotion that defines me. But there are plenty of reasons for Black women to be angry. But that is not our default way of operating, right? And I think that's why the importance of terms like Black boy joy, Black girl magic, things like that are so important to counter that, because we're more than just that. But we have plenty to be angry about. And for me, it's part of the work that I do. As a diversity professional, my anger channels me. And there's a lot to be angry about in terms of what exists in society. The fact that we're even having this conversation where we have to talk about our experiences of race in the workplace, I'm angry about that. And I let that be my fuel with the work that I'm doing. So more so, if someone experiences me as angry or as intimidating, the question more so is, why are you intimidated, right? And part of it is, what is your experience of how you're taking me in? And there's two parts to this dynamic, right? If you're seeing me a certain kind of way, what's going on for you, right? I'm not the only one that's showing up to this dynamic. But I say it's okay to be angry. It's your passion. Let it drive you. But there are plenty of times that I have to counter my white colleagues when they describe someone as being angry, and I say, why? Why did you frame like that? Because I thought that person was extremely passionate. But also realize how saying that, when you don't know somebody and you don't know what their background is, how that could be a trigger, right? So it's been interesting to have to educate around that, and how the word angry has become a trigger for us when that's the only word used to describe us. But it's true, there is anger there, but it's not solely who we are.
Absolutely, wonderfully put. Thank you so much. So Rose, I'm going to send this one over to you. So on the flip side of that, we often hear the negative connotations, the aggression, that sort of part of it. But then on the other side, as sort of what Rebecca was alluding to, we often hear Black girl magic or Black boy joy, right? And that often has the positive connotations to some of the ways that we exhibit ourselves in the workplace. And so I would love to hear from you. Why do you feel that sometimes non-folks of color have an issue when they see Black women exhibit their Black girl magic?
Another great question. I would say first and foremost, Black girl magic to me is a response to what we just talked about, us being angry, us being too passionate. To me, it is a phrase that celebrates our accomplishments. It's something that acknowledges and says, I see you. It is something that is for us and by us. And I would think that for others that are not Black women, that this can be intimidating in the same ways. And I know I've experienced this in work in the past, is that, you know, when you see a group of Black women or Black people together, you know, oftentimes that can be intimidating to others. Don't know why, because as Black people, we and Latina, we experience this all the time. So I think also this is an opportunity for us to create a better understanding why we hold so dearly to the phrase Black Girl Magic and celebrate each other in our accomplishments, because for far too long we hear the phrase the most disrespected person in America is a Black woman. And to me, this is the response by Black women to celebrate one another and to be proud of who we are and all the things that we do.
Absolutely. And what about you, Andrea? What do you think about the whole Black Girl Magic and sort of non-folks of color having issue with that?
I think similar to, you know, my previous response, if they're uncomfortable, then I think there's a lot of work for them to tap into and figure out why. You know, for so long, we've had to downplay our abilities, you know, our strengths, our talents, our skills, everything that we bring to the table. And when you're working in organizations, and I can say for myself, you know, working for one that has over 73,000 employees, it can be very intimidating. You know, it can be very easy to get lost in the mix of what's going on. And, you know, personally, with the amazing Black women that I've been able to meet at Northwell, we've actually created a group chat called Black Girl Magic at Northwell. And it really is a way for us to empower one another and to push each other. And not only that, but to really hold one another accountable. And I think sometimes other non-Black or brown individuals, I think sometimes they may get a little jealous because they don't have that same camaraderie and that same sisterhood from a cultural standpoint that we have and that has been instilled in us for many generations.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you so much. So let's flip gears just a little bit, and I want to get into a little bit about Black Lives Matter. So in light of the Black Lives Matter movement, do you think that this movement empowers women of color to have strong voices? And based on this movement, what do you think your next 10 years would look like in your professional environment? And Rebecca, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, I definitely think it has empowered voices of women of color in the workplace, in particular Black women. With this movement, it's visible. People are hearing about it. It's all the things that we're fighting for also aren't new. They've always been there. But the voices are louder. You have white people that are moving forward with this movement as well. And because of that, I think it's helping organizations understand a little bit better what the concerns are for Black people in the workplace. There have been some honest conversations I've been able to have with my leadership in a certain kind of way this past summer because of what's happening and because of the visibility. And it's kind of felt like, well, this is the thing that we've been saying for so long, but as long as you're hearing it at some point, right? And Black Lives Matter is helping to amplify this messaging, and people are starting to get it a little bit more. And I think, you know, we're really at this point reckoning in a lot of institutions that people are realizing the way in which racism kills. And even though a lot of institutions that we're working for may not be directly complicit in the killing of Black people at the hands of the police with this COVID-19 pandemic, we all play a role in the systemic inequity, right? As someone that works in higher education, we have a duty to educate students to the realities of what's going on in the world. We have a duty to educate students that are going to lead all these other industries that impact our society and become leaders and can approach their work in ways that dismantle racism. We have a duty, whether directly or indirectly, to think about the lives of Black people and stop from us killing Black people at disproportionate levels, right? So kind of, we have blood on all our hands. So as leaders in these industries, what are we doing to disrupt that? And so with all these organizations now putting out statements of aspiration and their beliefs about it, when you're putting that, now you have the people that are working in these industries holding you accountable, right? If you're saying you believe this, you have to take care of us as well as your employees, right? It's not just a statement to put out to the public, but what are you doing for the people that are moving your organization forward? And people are holding them to task. People are holding them to task. And so if you're going to say something, you have to stand behind it. So it will be interesting to see what happens over this next decade with the influence of Black Lives Matter. But I do think that it really is advancing the needs and the disparities that are occurring in communities of color, but in particular Black communities.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Yesenia, what about you? What do you think, in light of the Black Lives Matter movement, the next 10 years will look like for your professional development?
Well, I think the Black Lives Matter movement has been a powerful movement, and it has right now been the guidance for various other issues. For example, in my community, we keep pushing to insist that no human being is illegal, and and during this administration, we have seen how the community has been under attack constantly. So when we are with our community, we tell them that no one's free until everyone's free, right? And uh, during this pandemic, it was the Black Lives Matter movement that really began the movement within communities of color. You see, with the Black Lives Matter movement, it gave us that opportunity as well to show the disparities in amongst communities of colors. And through this pandemic, we have seen how the Latino and the Black community have been affected the most. They have been ignored the most, and they have died the most as well. And within this movement, they really showed they gave power to other groups. For example, I know in my immigrant community, in the Latino community, when we saw how the Black community stood up and was out and about organizing, it gave us that power as well to say, you know what, this community standing up, we should also stand up. So for us, I really feel that the Black Lives Matter movement is a model for various other communities.
Absolutely. And Andrea, what about you? How do you feel the next 10 years of your professional environment will be in light of the Black Lives Matter movement?
Yeah, great question. I think we're definitely starting to see it now. The other day I read about, Starbucks implementing and connecting compensation and bonuses to senior leadership based on their diversity and inclusion metrics. And I think we're really going to start seeing more and more of that, especially as this conversation continues to evolve. Personally, I think from a Black Lives Matter movement standpoint, although it has really amplified voices in the workplace, constantly having to remind those leaders, while you say the phrase because it's a hashtag and because it's trending, we're saying it because every single day when we show up to work, we have to tell the world that our life matters. We show up, we have our badges on, we're at your meetings, we're discussing strategies. But once we clock out, we now have to tell the world, no matter where I work or in spite of where I work, my life matters. And it's exhausting. I think for Black women and for my Latinx brothers and sisters, it's tiring, it's exhausting. And yet every day we wake up and we show up with our game faces on, still having to push the message, whether it be from a grassroots activism standpoint in our local communities, or when it's, buttoned up and politically correct. So that way it's well received at the board table or now the Zoom meetings. But I think, in addition to the compensation piece, I also think that we're seeing a lot of organizations realize that they've been missing the mark for many, many years now. And so they really do have to look at their talent pipeline and ensure that those high potential and those mentoring and sponsorship programs look a lot different for the next 10 years that they have in the past 10 years.
Absolutely. And Rose, what about you? How do you think the next 10 years will look in light of Black Lives Matter?
Well, first and foremost, I think about the incredible women that helped launch this movement, and to think about for the past several years to the men, women of all backgrounds, from all parts of the country who have really helped push this movement forward. And certainly during this reckoning that we are seeing after the tragic murders of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, what I would say, particularly in academia, where a lot of the activity and energy in terms of the demonstrations in New York City have happened, I think it is a moment where they will have to look inward and make some very important decisions about their policies regarding hiring, how decisions are made about leadership, in some instances, curriculum, and to really, really think about how to create an environment that is inclusive and welcoming to everyone. I agree with Yesenia. This has become a movement that has brought people of different backgrounds, and I hope that whatever industry that we are looking at, that 10 years from now, that we can see some very serious advancements that are meaningful and impactful and genuine. I agree. I don't want to see messages about the hashtag. I think this is a time for action. And I think other, whether you're in the corporate world, whether you're in media or any other industry, I think people are now really speaking up, and there's a lot of mobility and moving forward in terms of holding people accountable. So I'm excited to see what's going to happen in academia and certainly in government, which is a place where you can count the number of people in leadership at high levels. I think this is also going to be a reckoning.
Absolutely. So my next question I'm going to ask each of you, I'm going to start with Andrea. So if you had an opportunity to connect with your younger self, what advice or words would you say to yourself today?
I hope my younger self had time. I think, something that I would say to my younger self, and I tell myself this still to this day, it's something that one of my former leaders at Northwell, when I first started with the organization, said to me: be confident in what you know and humble in what you don't know. And I remember when she told me that after we had a conversation around me no longer wanting to recruit and wanting to move into other areas of healthcare. And it's so important, especially for myself. A lot of times I am the youngest in the room. I am the youngest having the conversation. And when you couple that with being the youngest Black woman, it's intimidating. And I remember when she shared that with me, and she is also a woman, Black woman. And when she said that to me, I realized that I should be confident in what I know because I've worked really hard to learn what I know. And I continue to be a learner and to constantly improve myself and expand my level of awareness, both within our organization as well as externally. And to be humble in what I don't know is that it's okay if I don't always know. And it's okay if people are relying on me to know. But to just always, tap into those resources that are available so that way I can connect others to what they need. And to just really always be a learner. Always be a learner, always look to grow.
Awesome. What about you, Rebecca? What would you tell your younger self?
I think I'm going to start where Andrea left off. Always be a learner. Absolutely. There's always something to learn. And don't feel intimidated by what you don't know. Really kind of go towards that fear, because that's really, it's in that growing edge that the truest learning really happens. You don't have to know it. You don't have to get it right. Really, really enjoy the process. Okay? To be very honest, there are many days that I kind of think back to my younger self, and I'm trying really hard to not live in the place of regret and trying to move away from that. But there are plenty of times I'm like, oh, I wish I would have done this. And so this question of what I would tell my younger self comes up for me quite a bit. And I try to pass it on to other young people that I'm amongst. But really, be in the learning process, ask questions, seek mentorship. If you don't know where you're going, ask someone who's been there before, right? So look for your mentors, look for people to guide you. It's okay to say, I don't know. And with that, I don't know, try to know. That's the learning. So really just have a sense of openness towards what you want. And whatever you are seeking out and that you need, if it's not there, create it. Because there's likely somebody else that's also seeking it out. And you might be creating something for somebody else in ways that you don't even know are really important to them.
Absolutely. What about you, Yesenia? What would you tell your younger self?
Well, just be you. Just be you. Growing up, a lot of the times, I always try to tone it down. I try to, I grew up in the south side of Chicago, so there's times, I'm going to be honest, that my slang does come out. And a lot of the times I always felt like, people try to undermine me and because, it just will come out. It's naturally. But the more, when I started getting comfortable of who I was, that is when, I started becoming more powerful. See, because one of the things is that, growing up in the south side of Chicago, what you learn is how to defend for yourself. You learn how to be outspoken. You learn how to know when somebody is lying to you, is just trying to, BS you. You learn all of these things growing up as a young woman of color in the south side of Chicago. So when I learned just to accept who I was, that is when I started becoming more and more powerful. And I think just as I always tell other young women that I mentor, just be you, and know that the moment you are comfortable with who you are, that is when you start becoming more powerful and you start becoming accepting of who you are as well. So, and a lot of everything that I learned back when I was younger in the south side of Chicago, the same things I implement right now as an ED. I fend for myself. I fend for my community. I'm very outspoken for my community. I know when politicians are BSing me. So again, it's like, the day that I learned just to be me and accept every part of me, that's when I became the most powerful.
Absolutely. What about you, Rose? What would you tell your younger self?
A couple of things. One, which is something that I know that as women of color, we deal with all the time, which is the imposter syndrome. And I would say to myself, my younger self, don't give in to the imposter syndrome. If you are prepared, if you have a passion or ambition to do something more, don't talk yourself out of pursuing that opportunity. I would say also that mentoring matters and networking matters. And I think sometimes as women of color, we are not taught to mentor one another, but also in terms of asking someone, being proactive to ask someone to be a mentor. And oftentimes we are not taught to network. And I wish that as an adult, I would have embraced that more. So that would definitely be something I would say to my younger self.
Absolutely. So I'm going to switch gears for a little bit, and I want to talk about COVID-19. And I'm going to give you some statistics to sort of set the stage for the next question. So according to McKinsey & Company, women, especially women of color, are more likely to be laid off or furloughed during the COVID-19 crisis, stalling their careers and jeopardizing their financial security. The pandemic has intensified challenges that women already faced. Working mothers have always worked a double shift, a full day of work followed by hours of spending care for their children and other household matters. Now, the supports that may have been possible, so things like school and childcare, may not no longer be available because of the pandemic. And Black women already faced more barriers to advancement than other employees. Today, they're also coping with disproportionate impacts of COVID-19 on the Black community. And the emotional toll of repeated instances of racial violence weighs heavily on their shoulders. And as the mother of those victims who were killed, who are holding up the world on their shoulders, they often lost their sons and maybe their daughters. McKinsey and Company also reveals that women of color are less likely to be supported during COVID-19 by their workplace. So my question to you, and I'll start with Rebecca, is what would you say to non-people of color who are supervisors right now as it relates to women of color and the pandemic?
Yeah, I think we really have to get out of this idea of the colorblindness. I don't know if people are still doing that, but we need to be able to see each other's racialized identities, because that is part of seeing our humanity, right? So if you want to be a supervisor to someone and support the people that are working for you, you have to see their humanity. And for people of color, that means seeing how our race may impact our experiences. So understanding what people are going through as it relates to that means seeing their humanity. This time more than ever, we need that, right? And especially while we're working in this kind of virtual space, we're not amongst one another. We don't have this personal touch. We also see a country that is divided and really has, is making people lose their faith in humanity. The workplace is where we need that even more, right? Where we're spending the majority of our days in, a place that hopefully we're building connection with one another and we feel like we're advancing the work of what we're doing. We need to be able to bring our whole self to work and feel like what is happening outside of the workplace can also be taken care of in the workplace. So yeah, see us for who we are. See us for our larger identities and how that might be impacting how we show up at work. And really reflect on the fullness of who we are in that kind of way. And do so because you care for the person, right? So, and it's not about being able to say you're doing this thing. It's not about your own personal guilt or discomfort around the realities of what's coming up right now, but how do we care for one another in this kind of way and do so with no expectation of anything else in return?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. What about you, Yesenia?
Well, when the pandemic hit, I knew that in that moment that the immigrant worker was going to be affected the most. That the immigrant community was going to be one of the most affected communities. So during that moment, I had to make a decision: do I close my center or do I not? And I just decided to keep my doors open. And to this day, my organization is still open. And because I couldn't close the doors on my immigrant community during these times. And majority of my staff, they are DACA recipients. And what I try to do, like within my organization, is I always want to give an opportunity to young women of color to see themselves in a leadership role and to be put in a leadership role. But for myself, I knew that a majority of my staff is DACA. And what happens with that is that we have seen how DACA constantly is being under attack. So it's in moments like that I think how Rebecca mentioned that you really have to understand that this person's this person depends a lot on this position, on this job, to be able to provide for the family. So I think when you are in a leadership role in an organization and a company or a job or not, that you also keep in mind of this person, the adversities this person has. And what I started seeing as well was how many other immigrant women were just being completely laid off without any disregard, and at that moment just seeing how they would come to Napo and tell us that, Yesenia, they just laid me off, and I don't know where else to find a job, and now I don't know how I'm going to provide for my family. You see, especially when you deal with the immigrant community, with immigrant working women who are domestic workers, and also with people who have that, is like you have to take really in consideration all the adversities that they will go through if they lose this position or this job. So I always try to keep in mind that person's that what that person would go through, but as well as someone who is in the military, I understand how hard it is for other women to be in the military, and I always try to. And I'm 31 years old, so when I do see young women that come in as 18, 19, 20, it's I always try my best to mentor them within the military and also guide them, because I know how hard it is when you are there and you are young, and so it's always understanding. It's always trying to put yourself in those persons in that woman's shoes.
Mhm. And what about you, Andrea? How do you think the pandemic fares?
Yeah, absolutely. I think right now, more than ever, supervisors and managers, anyone responsible for teams, really have to understand that it's not business as usual. And the way that your teams were performing pre-COVID and this particular wave, because let's be honest, this isn't the first time that we've really been experiencing all of, the trauma that we're seeing in the news and in social media from all of these police shootings and misconduct. Um, and so really understand that your team members are not okay. And you as a leader of people get to be present and get to be present in a way that you have never been present before, right? So when you're having your weekly team meetings or when you're having your bi-weekly one-on-ones with your team members, make sure that your phone is on silent. Make sure that you're not double booked. Make sure that you're committed to spending that time, that dedicated time with your team member. Because in that moment, it might be the time that they really need you and they may need that coaching. They may need that ear. So when you ask, how are you? When you ask, how was your day or how was your weekend? Be prepared to listen, because it's important that, whether you're working remote or you're still reporting into your offices, we're still putting in this time to deliver on whatever deliverables we have at our workplaces. And it's just important to know that we're all not performing in the way that we typically would or we prefer to. Also, I think it's so important for leaders to educate themselves. Black people, we've been around for a long time, and it's not my responsibility to teach you about racism or teach you about the different forms of implicit and explicit bias or microaggressions or passive aggressive behaviors in the workplace. That's your responsibility as a leader of people. And something as also that we push a lot within Northwell is leverage your human resources, your HR business partners. They're there for reason and purpose. So if you're uncomfortable or if you're unsure of how to handle conversations or how to handle certain situations, lean on your HR and educate yourself on what's within your scope, or use them as a partner to really build those relationships and connect those dots with your team members.
Absolutely. And what about you, Rose?
Sure. The concept of work has been totally thrown on its head. And for supervisors, from a work perspective, I think compassion, empathy, understanding, and flexibility are critically important. And to what everyone else on the panel has said, I completely support and don't want to repeat, but I do think it's also important for supervisors to have a time reflection and understanding their own blind spots and what they can do without relying upon people of color to help explain it for them. And allyship, I think, is extremely important. So how can you be an ally as you read these articles that are witnessing what is happening around the United States and the mobilization that is happening around the world? What is your responsibility as a leader to ensure that you are not only informed, but you're thinking about how these things impact your organizations and what are we talk about courageous conversations that need to happen in the workplace in order to make sure that all of your employees are supported, but particularly those that have been disproportionately impacted by COVID. The Black and Latinx community, that there has to be an understanding that in this moment, there is the pain and the loss of COVID. There is the pain and the loss that we have seen as the result of police brutality. and the challenges of the criminal justice system, and it's weighing heavily on us. And we all have a responsibility to stand up and to do something. And our job as leaders and as supervisors is to make sure that we are making sure that we are prepared, that when we come out of this, both COVID and whatever changes come as a result of this racial reckoning, that this organization and your staff are feeling prepared to move forward, but most of all, supported and heard.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. So I'm going to switch gears again a little bit, and I'm going to go to Andrea. I'm going to come to you first. So I want to give you some statistics just to set the stage. So based on, this comes from undefeated.com, 31% of Black women say their managers advocate for them for opportunities, compared with 34% of Latino women, 40% of Asian women, and 41% of white women. Black women feel less likely to interact with senior leaders, get advice, or even get stretch assignments from their managers. And only 29% of Black women believe the best opportunities go to the most deserving employees. The numbers for Latino women is 34% and 40% of Asian and white women. Despite these findings, the study says women of color have higher ambitions to be top executives than white women, and Black women are significantly more likely to want to skip the corporate dance altogether and start their own businesses. So my question to you, and Andrea, I'll start with you, is how do you feel about women of color having higher ambitions, but having to go out and start their own businesses? Should there be room for women of color in executive positions?
I think that's a great question. And I think my answer to that is yes to both. Yes, women of color, Black women, Latina women, we deserve those senior leadership positions. We're more than qualified, more than capable. And when you think back to, the history that we've overcome, we are a resilient force in this world. And so we know how to make a way, even if it's creating one for ourselves. And, the beautiful thing, and I've been so excited to read about the number of Black women, turning more and more towards entrepreneurship, because we're taking the skills and the resources that our organizations and our institutions are providing to us from a development standpoint. And now we're coupling that with our passion, and we're coupling that with the things that really do bring us joy. And now we're creating our own. We're creating our own legacies for ourselves, for our families. And it's just a powerful thing to watch. I'm inspired. I think about my best friend who has the most beautiful eye for fashion, and how, since COVID hit, she's really been able to take her passion for that and really take her brand to the next level while still working, while still homeschooling her two children, and knowing that so many others are out here doing that. But I think, in addition to that, it's okay to, to still want to aspire to occupy a senior level role within an organization. A lot of times on social media, you see these memes about entrepreneurship and why work here when you can have your own. And I don't think that one is better or worse than the other. I think that, wherever one's passion and vision, and most importantly, the vision that God sets for you, where that path may go, then that's the one that you walk in, and you walk in, with all that you have, because if it's for you, it will be yours. And the pathway may not look the prettiest, and it may get messy, but we will get there, and we do deserve to be there. And I think it's important that once we do get there, we're looking back, and now we're training up and preparing the next generation so that they too see themselves in the roles that we're occupying.
Absolutely. What about you, Yesenia?
Yes, I as I was indicating, like in the beginning, right? I remember when I was trying to look for somebody to be my mentor, right? When I was looking for other women of color, in someone that I can share, like, I guess my similar story with, that can understand me. And it was very difficult, again, navigating systems at the time by myself. Thankfully, I found various mentors along the way. And I remember when I arrived here to New York City, again, I was just, again, I came from the south side of Chicago, but I said, I want to come to New York City. I want to be able to see one of the biggest cities in the world, right? And for me, I was very young, and I was looking for guidance, and thankfully, I found various other women who supported me every step of the way. For example, Sayu from the New American Cedars Project. That specific project supports young women of color, immigrant women, to know how to navigate the political system, or just New York City in itself. And you see, it's like seeing her in that leadership position, and then seeing, for example, other women like Catalina Cruz in a leadership position, seeing Melissa Marquiverito in a leadership position. You see, it's like you start seeing other women in those positions, and you can also see yourself. So, as I said, bringing back to the organization that I'm in. What has been very helpful in helping the community and other immigrant women has been because, my mother was an immigrant woman, and I saw the difficulty that she had to navigate various systems on her own. And now, when I see other immigrant women, I always think about my mom, and I always can communicate with them as well because I speak Spanish. So, a lot of the times they also tell me that they say, "Oh, we're so happy that you're here, and you can communicate with us, and you understand us." So I think it's having us in these leadership positions, Black women, Latina women, and it just, we know how to relate to our communities, and I think it's really important for our community to be seen in these leadership positions.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. What about you, Rebecca?
Yeah, I think absolutely it's important to have Black and Latina women leading organizations, and nobody can do it like us. So I mean, just to think about what would become of these organizations if we were taking the lead. I mean, they're not ready for that fire, right? But but I think there's also something around like why so many women of color do start their own organizations. Like, just last week I had a good friend of mine that decided to leave her organization, which is a nonprofit, and it's a social justice organization, but yet is replicating the same forms of oppression that they say that they fight against. And for her, she's like, I have to be out. I have to start my own thing. And Black communities of color in general, like we've done this, right? We've created magic out of nothing, right? And so when we think about that whole Black girl magic, the whole idea is, how did you create this when we've taken everything away from you and you've been harmed, and we literally try to destroy you? Mm-hmm. But we're supernatural, right? That's what magic is all about. There's some supernatural power to it. So to think about the resilience that we wish we didn't have resilience, but it comes with it, right? To think about the lessons that come from the experiences that we have and the magic that you create from that, right? That you create from this marginalization, from being able to see through the experience of norm culture, but also have a different perspective of how to look at the world, right? And to bring those things together to create magic. Mm-hmm. There's so much that we have to offer, right? But unfortunately, we know who's leading organizations, and it is about being able to be given access while also showing how great we are, right? And working our way up. But when you have that blockage, what else do you do, mm-hmm. right? So it makes sense why you have people that are leaving organizations and starting their own thing, mm-hmm. And which is why it's so important for organizations to think about, how are we supporting employees of color? What kind of ERG groups are there? What kind of mentorship programs are there? Are we paying attention to how we're compensating people? Are we paying attention to how promotions are happening? Because no doubt there are limitations for where women of color are able to go in organizations. And I'm sure some of you have seen that cycle of women of color in organizations. When you come in, you go from pet to threat, right? So when you first come in, you're the pet. Everyone loves you. You have great ideas, excited to have you on board. You increase the diversity numbers, but then you start speaking your truths and you push back against certain things. And they're like, wait a second, we don't like what you're bringing here so much. And you start to become that threat, right? And then you have a cycle of when now you're moving out of the organization because the way you're welcomed in is not the same way when you're at the table and sharing your ideas. So we really have to think about how do we give space to Black and Latino voices, right? How do we understand those voices in interrupting our standards of operating, right? And also thinking about we have to interrupt the standards that we're operating in, because the norm right now, if we're continuing to operate in ways that we've been in the last few decades, it's not working. We're seeing a shift in our national demographics. We're seeing a shift in who's coming into professional settings, and we can't continue operating the way that we have been.
Absolutely. And what about you, Rose?
Sure. The first thing that comes to mind when I'm hearing everyone talk is this adage that I'm sure all of us has heard, that in the workplace as women of color, we've had to be 2 to 3 times better than everybody else. I think, and I applaud all of those women that are pursuing higher heights, C-suite opportunities within corporations. And I would say mentorship obviously is incredibly important, but another thing is a kitchen cabinet. And presidents have kitchen cabinets, CEOs have the same type of advisory body of people that can help you strategize how you move up within organizations, what kinds of conversations, networking that need to happen, but a group of people that are not going to not be afraid to tell you the truth. I think is extremely important. So one piece I would suggest is have a kitchen cabinet. Make sure that you have a group of people that are only thinking about you and your success and how you can move forward. I also feel that for the women of color that get to the C-suite or get to be the executive directors within the not-for-profit, government, or academia, it is important for us to think about reaching back and ensuring that as leaders that we are bringing others to go ahead of us, which is, to me, critically important. And oftentimes that sadly doesn't happen. I also think that a lot of the ingenuity that you see happening in New York City is because of women entrepreneurs who have decided that they're not going to be waiting to be tapped on the shoulder for their position, and decide that they are going to be their own CEO. And I think that is extremely exciting. Obviously, there are challenges that come with that, but I applaud those women and hope that there are opportunities to create those pipelines for women who want to make those transitions. And certainly within the not-for-profit community, I can completely relate that oftentimes we see at certain levels of not-for-profits, people that look like us. And when you get on the board level or the C-suite level within the not-for-profit, oftentimes you're the only one or not reflected at all. And so these are all opportunities that we should be thinking about. How do we have more conversations about these avenues? What organizations can provide that support to women? And I would also say in the field of politics, which I also come from, that it's so exciting to see more and more women who say, I'm not going to wait my turn and I'm going to run.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much. So I'm going to flip back a little bit. We've been talking a lot about our authentic selves, and a lot of young women who are in college, making their way, maybe getting ready to graduate and start their careers, they, especially women of color, whether it be Latino or Black women, they're often very articulate in the way that they present themselves. And sometimes it's been told to them that they maybe talk white or have a white voice in the way that they articulate. And so my question, and I'm feeling like I want to go to Rebecca for this one to start. What do you say to those women who are grappling with whether or not they should sort of continue to be articulate in the way that they present themselves versus what society is telling them in terms of talking or acting white?
Oof, the code switching. We've been dealing with that for years. I was just leading a workshop about that today too. So you got me at the right time. It's an interesting balance around whether we show up as our authentic selves, and also knowing that you're entering institutions that may not be receptive to that, right? So I think part of it is framing around your personal decision around what do you want to do, right? Knowing the reality of the spaces that we're in, that not everybody is hip to understanding the impacts of internalized racism, how that's been the reality of all of our lives, white and people of color, right? Whether it's internalized racial superiority or inferiority that we're taking on, right? But the presence of it is real. So part of it is, do you see authentically as yourself and say, well, if they don't accept me, that's not the place for me. And that's just where I can't fully be myself. Or do you put on that voice that all of us have done, because unfortunately we've been ingrained in this society that's told us how to do that, and get your foot in the door and then reveal yourself once you're there. It's a hard question to grapple. I know for me, I'm at a point right now in my career and have been with my institution for 10 years and have a name there and well known. So I can show up in a certain kind of way because I've worked my way up to that, right? And people know me about as having no apologies and being able to do that. But I've known where I've had tiptoe and eventually get there. So especially for young people that don't have the experience, it's not going to be so easy to show up in that way when we know that there's a world that doesn't like for us to show up in that kind of way. There have been messages that we've internalized, not just in professional settings, but in our whole own household, right? Where anti-Blackness runs deep, and where we've told messages around how we're supposed to show up. My mom would kill me for having my twist out right now, right? Like, let's be honest. And in terms of certain messages that we passed on in terms of what professionalism looks like and how to show up to that. So it's a hard balance where we tell someone, you make the decision for how you're going to decide to approach this, but just know that some people, some places may not accept you for doing that. And it might be our own kind, right? That uphold messages of racism in these white institutions, right? But you decide how authentically you want to show up, and then see what happens from there. But it's a tough one. That's a really tough one for how to show up.
Absolutely. Andrea, I'm going to come to you. What do you think?
Yeah, that's a powerful question. I think something that I would say to, young women is that you get to be complex. You don't have to show up one way all the time for everybody. And once you learn what your passion is, and once you start to understand your purpose and the work that you're here, in this world and put on this earth to do, that it's going to require you to speak the language to the different audiences that you're going to meet in order to really execute on your purpose. And that's okay, because your purpose is yours. Your mission is for you, and you know what you need to do to accomplish that. I remember one time my friend said that it's important to be able to work the room at a gala, sit at a boardroom, and yet still be able to go on the block to get your friends to vote. And, we get to be multifaceted, right? Why not? Why can't I appeal to different audiences? Because my people in my community look different. I have people on one block who work for Fortune 500 companies. And then I have others who don't. And I get to appeal to both audiences, and it's okay. And yes, code switching, it's very exhausting, especially when you're really starting to figure out who you are and starting to learn more and more about the power of your own voice and how it shows up in different spaces. But, to the point that Rebecca made earlier, enjoy that journey, experiment with it, have fun with it, because it's yours. And the more you do trial and error, the more you figure out what works best for you and where you get your biggest wins, you'll really be able to take that power over that and really know and understand who you get to choose to be, and when you want to choose to be that person or that version of yourself.
Absolutely. Yesenia, what do you think?
Well, I echo exactly what was just said, because one of the things is that, again, right, when I learned to be myself and just be true to myself who I was, that's when I started becoming more powerful. And what I meant by that too, by trying to become more powerful, is that I started to learn how to get into places that I never thought I would be able to get in before, right? And I started to learn how to navigate these places. I started to learn how to play the game as well, right? So I think for me is that I know when I'm in this particular space, I know how to speak to this person and then to get what I need and for my community. And then, I go to DC, and then I end up talking to elected officials, both in Congress and Senate. And then I have to come back to my community and talk to the everyday mother and father, to the immigrant woman who just came from either from a different part of the world, you see. So and I guess it goes back to the same thing. When I learned how to be true to myself, then that's when all these other doors started opening, and then that's when I started getting into these places and learn how to navigate these places and learn how to again, I am very proud of myself that I know how to I guess, like I think how it was mentioned earlier, I could go down the block and just know how to talk to the everyday, mother and father. And then I could go to another location and then start having these board meetings. I'm very proud of myself that I learned how to do that, because I know how to speak for myself and for my community in all these other places. But it all came down to when I started being comfortable with who I was and be happy with who I was as well.
Absolutely. And what about you, Rose?
Once again, I think everybody hit it right on the nail. I would say, first and foremost, women of color, we're dynamic. And there are different aspects to us, whether it be we're multilingual, multicultural, and always be mindful of the rooms that you're showing up into. I think, quite frankly, that is part of the magic that we have, that we can enter into different rooms and understand how we can be heard in those rooms. And a lot of people don't have that capacity or that skill set to do that. So it is something to embrace. And I think it's actually normal to understand what room you're in and how you're going to talk. If I'm in a courtroom, or I'm giving an interview, or I'm advocating within the community, I'm using different voices. And when I'm with my girlfriends or my family, obviously it's a completely different voice. And for people that are question, how you sound, is really about the work that they need to do, and not understanding that we as women of color are not a monolith and come from a variety of experiences. Personally, I got teased because I grew up on Long Island, so I have a severe Long Island accent. So
Thank you so much. So in the same vein, I often get questions from young women of color about hairstyles. So, they're graduating from college, they're getting ready to start their career, and some may have been told that they shouldn't wear their afro, or they shouldn't put color in their hair, or They shouldn't put their locks in, right? And so I'll start with Andrea. Can you speak a little bit about what you think about women when they're starting to sort of put together their image, their professional image that they're going to present in light of all that is going on in the world? And, as they think about their future, do you think it's a good idea for them to, wear their locks? Or do you think that maybe they should maybe conform a little bit more to what society is telling them to do?
I think it's important for women to present themselves unapologetically in a way that they're comfortable, that they're empowered, and that they know they're going to be able to perform at their absolute best. I can speak from personal experiences, and this is actually a recent one. Over the summer, I always get box braids in my hair because I don't want to have to manage my own hair in the humidity. And I experienced a situation, this past summer where a comment was made about my braids and the hairstyle that I had it in. And, personally for me, I was empowered enough to have a conversation with a colleague in HR to get, coaching around how to approach that situation. But I think it's important to know that, you don't have to conform to a standard of beauty or a standard of what other people look like, just so that way your skills can shine in a professional setting. And I say that, with being responsible, right? So if you're going into corporate America, or if you're going into an industry or a field where it's not common practice to show up with bright red hair or, looking just not put together, then of course you have to take that for what it is. But I think it's learn your industry, right? Learn your industry, see who else is out there, who you identify with, and how they're showing up. Experiment with your fashion and with the style that you want to portray within your organization, and do it in a responsible way. And I loved what you said before. It took 10 years or so being in your organization and really being able to fill out that culture and create that culture for yourself, that you can show up unapologetically as who you are. And, I charge that with not walking into anywhere with that sense of entitlement either. In spite of everything that's going on, we still get to be professional. We still get to show up prepared. We still get to show up ready. And we also get to balance that with being our true selves and being confident in who we are, whether it's through our physical attributes or any others.
Absolutely. So my next question, as I'm watching the time, I could go on for hours talking to all of you. You guys have been just absolutely amazing. I want to go back, and I'm going to throw this one to Rose, because I heard you mention the kitchen cabinet, and I love that phrase. I've never heard it in that way. That's amazing. So can you speak to the young women of color out there who are looking for a mentor or to create and sort of establish their kitchen cabinet? How do they go about doing that?
Sure. I can share a little bit about my experience and something that I didn't use very actively. And then when I was making a career transition, it was really helpful. One of the things that I think is an effective tool for young professional women is LinkedIn. I think it's incredibly helpful. Reaching out to people, I find, particularly on LinkedIn, people are extremely friendly. And if they don't respond, move on and go to the next, I would say. Also, there could be women in the workplace that maybe are your colleagues or someone who may be a supervisor. Ask them if you can have a few minutes on their schedule. Ask them if you can take them out to lunch or coffee. Think about the people that mean the most to you. That can be family, that can be friends, that can be coworkers. But at the end of the day, understand, and this is something that I had to understand about myself, is that I must be the CEO of Rose Pierre-Louis Inc., right? And that in order to do that, you need to think about who are the people that can help you, whatever dreams, aspirations that you want to do, is to not be afraid to do that, to not be afraid to express that out loud, and to think about who are the people, whether you know them or not. It could be someone in your neighborhood, it could be a neighbor that can help you get there. But you could start out with just your friends and just your work colleagues. But think about LinkedIn, think about things that you're seeing through forums like this or other kinds of professional development activities that are happening. And a lot of times you get to meet a lot of interesting people. But I would say a kitchen cabinet can be very helpful for young professionals.
All right, so young people of color out there, go get your kitchen cabinet going. I love it. Rebecca, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, no, I say the same thing. I want to back up LinkedIn. Actually, I got my start in my career through LinkedIn, and it was mainly because I was looking for a transition. I didn't know who to reach out to, so I went into the program that I wanted to work for. I looked up directors of all those programs and reached out and said, hey, I'm interested in this work. Can I talk to you? And I had one person that reached back out to me. We talked. And just by chance, there was a position open a month later. And at the point that I applied, they were already about to extend an offer to somebody else. And she advocated for me to come in for an interview. She said she met with me. She seems great. Let's just at least interview her. And her supervisor was adamant about moving forward. And she's like, no, I met with her. Let's just give her a try. And that was starting off as a counselor for a program. And, I was in that program, moved up. Obviously, I got the job, and having that LinkedIn connection helped to make that happen. Had we not met, it wouldn't have worked out. Went from being a counselor to a director to now the college's chief equity, diversity, and inclusion officer. But had I not reached out through LinkedIn, had I not said, hey, let's give it a try, that wouldn't have happened. So really having that curiosity, wanting to meet people, wanting to connect is really important. And as Rose said, yes, that's a really great resource, so use it to your advantage. Find us on there. I'm sure all of us will accept. But if you don't have your network, seek out ways to make it happen. Reach out to somebody you trust and say, hey, are there one or two people that you can put me in contact with? When you meet those people, ask them, are there one or two people you can put me in contact with, right? So find the people that you trust, find out who they trust, and start to build your network in that way.
Thank you. So we have come to the end of our time. I could talk to all four of you for hours. So I want to thank you guys so much for taking part in our amazing panel today. I hope the audience enjoyed it. On behalf of Union Settlement and all the panelists, I want to thank everyone for their honest and important opinions and conversations. Union Settlement will continue to create innovative forums like this for the community to discuss important topics like women and race, as well as others that are resonating so loudly in our world right now. We also want to thank NNN for partnering with us to bring this event to life. We wish everyone continued health during this unprecedented and difficult time. Thank you all and have a wonderful evening. Thank you guys. Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.